miles. Okay, now in this next article in the Washington Post by Thomas O'Toole, the next major character shows up that I think is very important to this story, and his name's Dr. Jerry Neubauer, and he was the IRAS chief scientist for California's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he was the director of the Palomar Observatory for Caltech, where my kids in college there. Okay, so he's an important dude. He's got his fingers on the data from the IRAS satellite, the one that had to be super cooled, right, to detect this thing. So he shows up in this article, and he's almost like he's in disagreement with Harrington, and it's interesting because he says he thinks it's 50 billion miles away, not 5 billion outside of Pluto. Okay, so there's contradiction number one. Okay, and additionally, he stated that he was trying to douse any fears by saying that it's not inbound. Okay, but at the same time, one of the other scientists said that even if it's 50 billion miles that close to the Earth, then it's part of our solar system. Is what he was saying.
Sure.
So this was a guy named James Houck from Cornell University. Okay, so these are serious scientists talking about that. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is just pure scientific data from the IRAS satellite in 1981. Okay. Now, what's interesting is they were clever enough to say, well, is it moving or not? So in order to do that, you've got to take two measurements. And they call it the blink method, right? You take one and wait some period of known time, and take another one, and then come up with the delta x, and the delta time, and you can come up with the speed, change in x over change in time.
Sure.
Okay, so apparently Harrington waited 6 months after his first measurement to take a picture of this from the IRAS. Okay, so they had a really good blink. Okay, and this is where Neubauer comes up and says it's 50 billion miles away, and talks about all the super cooling they had to do to get the picture. And then he says something very significant. He says it's not incoming. Neubauer said, I want to douse that idea with as much cold water as I can. Now, why would he say such a thing if they had just taken the blink method of it, but didn't discuss anything about the data? That's very curious to me.
So it's murky. It's very, very murky to do that.
Yeah. So I don't know what role this guy was playing. He almost seems to have been playing a little bit of a disinformation role. Whoever this guy was put in a position to have access to this data directly from the IRAS scope. Okay, but the bottom line is none of them disagreed that they had found something very large. What appears to be in disagreement is how far away it was, and whether it was moving, right? Mm-hmm. So that got left out of the article. But the next link I found as I was starting to look at articles, I had no idea how many articles have been published on Planet X Nibiru. By the way, I gave you a link on this in this section. It's on page 25.
Sure.
It goes all the way back to the 50s, and there are hundreds of articles, not just 5 or 6. There are hundreds of articles.
I got through a couple, Gerald. I got through a couple. There's so many. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
There's so many. So the idea that there's something tangible at the end of the universe that's disturbing big planets is so physical and believable to people that it's been a focal point for investigation for a very long time. Okay, that's not new. Okay, so I wanted to finish up with that. Now, so we got to 1981. There were several more articles. Almost every year you see in that link that I gave you, talking about Planet X updates. Well, it turned out there was some real disinformation going on in the year 1991. But it turns out that was the year also, right after Harrington had done this interview with Sitchin. Apparently he went off to this place in New Zealand that we looked up. Do you remember where that was in New Zealand?
Black Birch, I think it was.
Right. So he took an 8-inch telescope there on his own to go see if he could actually get personal images using the blink method, like we were describing here, 2 different measurements at different times, and then seeing if it had moved and how fast it was moving. Well, let's think about that for just a second. Number one, he was so convinced by the IRS data that this thing is inbound and that it's within the distance that he could see it from the southern hemisphere, or looking from New Zealand south. He believed it was in the constellation Libra, coming in near Cassiopeia. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the diagram I showed Google Earth where that was. Okay, so it coincides with this southern path that Harrington believed in as well, but he added his precessional updates to make it more accurate. And Sitchin did not disagree with him, by the way, when he said that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here he is in New Zealand, and I don't have the article in front of me, but he went there to get data, and he was due back to release this data at a conference in the United States when he came back. Well, apparently he never came back and died suddenly of throat cancer there in New Zealand with his 8-inch scope. Now think about that, the just audacity of a cancer killing somebody that quickly, getting on an airplane, going over there, not talking about, you know, being a victim of cancer or anything, and all of a sudden just dying from it within a short period. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. So, very, very, very significant red flags in the demise of Harrington and what he was doing relative to this planet that had been discovered. Mm-hmm. Listen, he was the chief, he was the supervising astronomer. He came back with his personal data that probably got absconded with through whatever forces were controlling the IRS data directly. Mm-hmm. It looks like he was headed off the path, and he was not allowed to share that. But what I want you to take away from that is, if he was able to take an 8-inch scope and potentially see it inbound to the point where it goes into perihelion with the sun, where it basically goes behind the sun, you can't see it. If he was able, in his belief, that he could go someplace and look south and see this for some period of time, and apparently this was one of the few places on the planet, according to him, based on the thickness of the atmosphere and several other issues, that he could actually see it. So that's very telling, what he was up to. Now, I don't even know what to say. What are your thoughts about
it's the incredible.
Fact that if he was able to see it, that means it was probably within the not the inner planets, but at least on the inside of Pluto, such that he could see it. I mean, just think about an 8-inch scope; its range of limitation.
I mean, the guy was about to give the biggest discovery of our century, if not our millennium, Gerald, to the public. He was about to release like tangible evidence of this. He went looking for it and he got it, and he was in the place and the one location on the planet to do that. Fast-acting cancer killed him. And look what happened to the Nibiru Planet X hypothesis after that. It fell.
Oh, I know.
It
exactly.
Basically disappeared. And if you look at the list of articles going back to the 50s, Gerald, go to the 30th of November 91, where science say goodbye to the 10th planet. There is no 10th planet.
Exactly. Yeah, so right after Harrington died, all of a sudden you saw in the media this smear campaign to make Nibiru go away. It was very, very telling. And you can only see these kind of things in retrospect.
Yeah. I mean, and they did a good job. They buried the story of Nibiru. Only for it to resurface as just this thing in the Oort cloud, and it's like, it's not Nibiru, it's a Planet X again. This Nibiru seems to be disengaged from Planet X. This Planet X is supposed to be a new astronomical scientific hypothesis, and the word Nibiru is like this dirty word associated with Sumerian.
Exactly. It's like exactly what they did with UFOs. If you used to talk about a UFO, you were made to be shameful because you must be losing your faculties, right? Well, it's the same thing that they're doing with Nibiru.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, make no mistake, this Nibiru isn't going away, Gerald. I mean, it's incredibly interesting because there's something there. There's something tangible. There's a lot of scientific data, a lot of historical data. You know, and Harrington's analysis really, you know, the fact that they buried that for so long, that's one thing, but it's not gone forever, Gerald. I mean, there's too many people on the case
now. No, it's not. So, do you want to take a break and then come back and do some
let's take a
data
break,
analysis?
Gerald, because let's take a break because we want to get into you know, where this leads us now. I mean, we'll come back after the break and we'll get into where we're at with it now today, and we'll take it, you know, what's happened since Harrington's time. What can we do? What can we tell? And what can we find out? And is there like any prediction, or is there any safe zone we can say? I mean, at the end of the day, if this thing is incoming, Gerald, we're going to want to know about it. I mean, it'll probably wipe out half the planet if it comes in close. It might come and, you know, have a safe passing, Gerald. You know, but if there's anything we can know about it, even predict a kind of window of opportunity when this thing's going to appear. Or if there's anything we can know, we'll try and guesstimate. We'll do a guesstimate or a best guess. We'll come back on the break and we'll get into what happened since Harrington's time.
Okay, sounds great.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and you can catch everything I'm doing on the Capricorn members page, or capricornradio.com will take you to the free 1 hour shows as well. But of course, become a member. You can catch the shows as they are released in the member section. Of course, you're going to listen to today's author at geraldclark77.com and read all about him there. And we are talking today about Nibiru. And for those that didn't pick up before the break, Gerald had to prompt me to go to break because I got so excited talking about Nibiru. But are you back with me, Gerald?
Yeah, brother, I'm back with you.
Hey, I got so excited talking about it. I forgot to go to break, Gerald. I was in Planet Nibiru land there. I was like, I'm just so enthralled in what we're talking about, Gerald. It's incredibly exciting to get down to some kind of, to synthesize the data and to get to some, to get to the heart of what's going on. I definitely think, Gerald, there's a lot of disinformation out there. I mean, there's a minefield of disinformation, and there's people out there very hungry to know what on earth is going on with this, because number one, is it real? Number two, is it coming our way? It's two simple questions, Gerald. Very, very simple questions, and very realistic questions, very pertinent questions. You know, is it real? Is it coming our way? It's one question follows the other. I don't want to be a prediction machine either, Gerald, and I don't want to do what the others are doing out there, but I do want to do today's show for the purpose of trying to find out some answers, and there's going to be one I think we can speculate and we can put a window there, I guess, at best. I think it's safe to do that. But yeah, I mean, where are we at since Harrington's day? I mean, things start to really go by the wayside in the research. I mean, they really did hit a curveball at Nibiru Research there with that one, Gerald, and they just, you know, they seem to smash all any serious research. It's taken a long time to get back on track.
Well, it seems like a couple of things. Number one, there's been a stake put in the ground by two doctors, Dr. Harrington and Dr. Neugebauer, both significant characters who were at the forefront with their hands on the money, on the instruments, looking out in space. Okay, so I really want to defer to that and focus on the data that they gave out so that we could go forward. Now, before we get too much farther past Harrington and all this disinformation campaign, from the point where he met with Sitchin in August 30th of 1990, he showed an orbital map that caused me to think to myself, would he be carrying a map around that was not to scale? Because he had specifically drawn Nibiru just outside of Pluto at that time. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the distance outside of these orbital lines that he had drawn for these other planets, was that significant? Did he do it based on a scale? You know, so we started with the cylinder seal, VA-243, found out that was scaled, which scientifically is very hard to refute. okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I hope Sitchin sits up in his grave and salutes us for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure.
So
yeah.
this is so we're talking about a real stake in the ground, circa 1978 when they first commissioned these probes to go look at it, all the way up to 1990. He's meeting with Sitchin saying, yeah. Now, from that chart that he gave us in 1990, we have to assume that the observation that he had for Nibiru was at that location at that time. Now, to be fair, in 1981, when that Detroit article came out, and then the Tombaugh article in the New York Times in 1983, Neugebauer said it was 50 billion miles away, whereas Harrington said it was only 5 billion miles beyond Pluto. Well, depending on how fast it was moving, from 1981 to 1990, when he met with Sitchin, if it was moving, it could have already been parallel with or inside of Pluto by that point. Is the point I'm making. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So then it brings up to their question, well, we know it's 1,800 miles, or 1,800 years straight line out if it takes a 3,600 year orbit, if you believe all the records that say a SAR, which the Sumerian Kings list were written in, SARS, which was a 3,600 year period. So if you believe that to be true, take half of that. That's how far out it takes to go in and then go back out, right? So then, using distance equals rate times time, you can figure that out. But before we do that, let's go back to Harrington's scaling on his map. So what I did is I took his map with the orbital plane lines that are shown for our known 9 planets, and then the spot he had drawn as a circle for Nibiru at some distance outside of Pluto's orbit, okay? So I said, well, is it to scale? And I wanted to know this because if he had drawn it where he believed it was to scale, then all of a sudden we would have a point in time to know exactly where it was, right?
Oh,
and this is the whole question, is we know the data's out there. Somebody's got it in their hands that's looking at either Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, Voyager 1 or 2. Whoever's looking at that data, they have the answers, okay? And so everyone else, in my opinion, is speculating. Only those people have it. And it looks like it went from JPL / United States Naval Observatory handling of this matter over to NASA. Did you notice that? So everything now comes through NASA. Whereas before it was through these rogue scientists that were actually open and discussing and were probably honorable.
Mm-hmm.
At least one. At least Harrington was. From what
at least Harrington, anyway.
Okay, so I measured the distance from the Sun to Pluto, the Sun to Nibiru, took those linear distances and assumed that they were to a scale, and then solved for the rate, distance equals rate times time for Nibiru, and then tried to calculate, or actually I solved for the distance first, to see if what the distance was corresponded with what Harrington believed. And it turns out, in that calculation, Nibiru was 6.66 billion miles away from the Sun. If his orbital chart was to scale. Now, remember, he said it was just outside of Pluto, and he thought it was 5 billion miles away in 1981, or 1983. Actually, he said it in 81. It showed up in 83. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if it's moving, it's inbound toward perihelion, then at this point in time, it would have been 8.6 billion miles. Well, now here in 1990, in his diagram, he's got it down at 6.6 billion. Well, if you were to actually go one step further and assume those two calculations are correct based on him, you've got 2 points in time and you could calculate the velocity.
Sure.
The real question is, how many astronomical units is Nibiru really from the Sun? And because we don't know whether Neugebauer is telling the truth about 50 billion miles, no. Just because Neugebauer said their IRAS said it was 50 billion miles away in 1981 doesn't mean it was at aphelion. Okay? It was somewhere in its orbit. That's not how far away it was, so you could calculate the rate part, okay?
Gotcha.
So I think there is an ephemeral calculation where you can take, if you knew the mass exactly, you can calculate what the orbit would be to be 3,600 years, and it would tell you how many astronomical units it is away from the sun. And I can take this one step further and do that, okay? But just based on a linear analysis, to see if Harrington's chart was to scale, it looks like it possibly was. Because 6.6 billion miles is just outside of the 3.6 billion miles for Pluto, and it's less than the 8.67 billion miles that it would have been in 1981 when he first discussed it.
Allows it time to get to where it is in 1990, basically.
Well, that means Neugebauer and him are off by 43.34 billion years away.
If anything, it indicates that Neugebauer is off with his data, and that Harrington was right on the money with his data, and that his drawing was to scale as well. It seems to indicate.
Well, that I went back and forth questioning whether it was to scale, and now that I've come back and looked at the document, realized what he said, and what he did in 1991, where he went to New Zealand to actually look at it with an 8-inch scope. That means it was coming in close. Listen, I used to have a telescope, and it was a variety called a Schmidt-Cassegrain.
I know them, yeah.
And the reason those are popular is because you can get a lot of length in your viewing angle and have a short longitudinal axis because it uses a reflection inside.
Yeah, it's like half the length of a normal Newtonian or Doppler.
Exactly. So if he had only an 8-inch scope, I suspect it was a Schmidt-Cass. Well, I've used one of those, and I know what the limitations are. I mean, you've got to have something in pretty close to be looking at something with an 8-inch scope. So what I'm saying is Harrington was on to something in 1991 where he went to look at it and was about to disclose this. That means it was inside the orbit of Pluto by that point. To me, that's what that means. For him to be able to take an 8-inch scope and see it, and this is where it gets really crazy in some of the analysis I did, okay? Are you with me?
I'm here, bro. I'm here.
Yeah, so at this point in time, I'm starting to bounce a couple things through my head going, well, okay, well, let's be conservative and assume that Neugebauer's distance of 50 billion miles could be used. And let's even be further worst case, let's assume that's at aphelion. Okay, that it's in its farthest orbit, just for fun. Maybe that's why he gave that number, don't know. But that number is important in order to determine the correct speed. Okay, because we have the time. We know it takes 1,800 years if you believe half of a SAR is what it would take to come in and then another half SAR to go out.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So that number comes out to be 27,777,777 miles per year if you use 50 billion miles in 1,800 years. That's what I call the Neugebauer rate. So what can we do with that? Well, we can then use that to see how long it would take Nibiru to come inbound, okay? And instead of going from a historical point in time in the past, we could take this observation, whether Harrington's right or whether Neugebauer's right. We have some data from a real satellite or from an IRAS scope, okay?
Sure.
And that's really important to stay scientific here.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things we need to know to play these games. And we're going to use Pluto as an outer boundary because it's the last one out there at the edge of our known solar system, sans Nibiru. And it sits at 3.6750050 billion miles. Okay, so it's just call it 3.67 billion miles, okay, from the sun. Right? So how many years does it take Pluto to come to its inner orbit or perihelion with the sun? Well, we know what this is. It's 248 years. Okay, so here's something in my head I would use as a milestone, that if Nibiru came parallel to Pluto and traveled at the same rate that Pluto did, it would take 248 years to make the perihelion. Okay? Now, there's something else that you have to consider here is when a planet comes close to the central sun and goes around it and then goes back out to its orbit, especially if it's an elliptical orbit, which most of them are, especially the outer planets, then it gets a little slingshot effect when it comes in close. Okay, so it travels faster near the sun than it does when it's at the furthest point away from the sun. So it's not, so what I have calculated for Neugebauer's rate is an average speed, but it does not take into account the slingshot effect. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's very significant.
Oh, yeah. Especially on the elliptical, and which is, you know, taking Nibiru's highly elliptical orbit. That's got to be a pretty high sling.
So, and also based on its size, and I messed around with a little bit, and I think I have a figure that basically it will be 20 times faster at aphelion, or perihelion than it would be at aphelion, meaning the furthest distance away. It's going to be slower by a factor of 20 and faster by a factor of 20 when you get close to the sun.
Wow.
Okay, so so that's significant. So anyway, so now we have a marker, 248 years that it takes Pluto at the edge of our solar system to come in around the sun. Okay, there's just something real physical and tangible that we can compare with, right? So where we left off was if Nibiru got parallel with Pluto, how long would it take? Well, that comes down to how fast it's traveling. Okay, so this becomes the next important thing. So we just said that Harrington, with his 8-inch scope in New Zealand at this special location at this particular point in time, must have thought he could see Nibiru coming in from the southern hemisphere, about to cross our solar ecliptic and go in behind the sun, where it would be lost for some period of years or portion of a year, and then re-emerge as it's heading back out toward aphelion. Okay? So how long does it take by the time it crosses our Mars, Jupiter, or apparently between Mars and Jupiter is where it crosses near the asteroid belt.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the place where it would cross our solar ecliptic and then go back behind our sun, ricochet around it, or slingshot around it, and then come back out to the side, right? So in my opinion, Harrington had to have thought it was coming close to the point where he could see it in the galactic ecliptic, meaning it was not only inside Pluto, but was approaching the place where he could see it coming between Mars and Jupiter. So that's like, wow, that's really advanced if it was that far in,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyway, so we got this marker, 248 years. Don't lose track of that. So the next thing I thought, well, what if it comes up parallel with Pluto based on this Neugebauer rate? How long would it take to come inbound to the Earth? To the Sun at perihelion. Well, that number turns out to be 3.67 billion miles divided by Neugebauer's rate, that 27 million number I told you.
Yep.
Well, that comes out to 132 years. So now all of a sudden you go, okay, well, if that's true, then about 1990 or so, when he met with Sitchin, when Harrington met with Sitchin, he said it was 5 billion. So so it was still about 5 billion miles outside of Pluto. That's only 3.6 billion. So, maybe 1995. Okay, we'll pick that point and say, well, okay, it's parallel with Pluto. How long would it take to come in? Well, we said 132 years at the Neugebauer rate. So that would be, at 132 to 1995. Well, that still puts it for a piece out, right?
Sure.
Problem is, it doesn't take into account the slingshot rate, because this is the average rate for Neugebauer to go the whole way around. Okay, well, this is where the ephemeral calculations are very important.
It's an average rate, and it's also conservative too, Gerald. But yes,
it's conservative, because if Nibiru would actually have been at aphelion, its further distant point when they saw it, and then you calculate, divide it by 1800, you could see that number would be bigger, so it would be faster. So it's very conservative, okay? And then I thought, okay, well, let's suppose that Harrington's orbital chart that we think now was to scale indicated that Nibiru was 6.66 billion miles away in 1990, in August. Okay, so now we have a specific date, a specific location. Let's use this average rate and see what the worst case would be. Well, that number comes out using Neugebauer's rate to be 239 years from the point where he showed it on that map, which is outside of Pluto. Okay?
Sure. So
I batted about in my document, well, maybe that's because it wasn't to scale. Then I noted that if you took 1983 and added 33 years, it came out to 2016. And I'll show you, I'm not going to tell you why I did that, but you'll see it in the document. Okay, it's quite significant. So it comes out to 2016. Very interesting. So in the first table that I did, table 3, I call it the Nibiru transit table. I took the distance from Pluto as the outer edge. We knew that was about 248 years. Took Neugebauer's rate, and then I added a few scalars, 1 through 5, to add this slingshot effect, because I didn't know what it was for a planet the size of Nibiru. Well, it turns out I found a little bit more about it later. Well, so we said at a scalar of 1, it takes 132 years to come in. So that would put you in at 2115. That's a long ways away.
Okay, 2115.
You take that scalar up to 2, it cuts it in half. Now you're at 2049. And let's go all the way up to 5, or number 4, a velocity scalar of 4. Now you're looking, number of years to perihelion is 33. There's that 33 I was just telling you about. And that comes out to the year 2016. So all of a sudden I saw this and I thought, those numbers are kind of looking real now. This could be real, okay?
It is, and here's the thing, Gerald. This is very realistic and conservative math. It's not extravagant. It's not working the numbers. This is basically accommodating all the known factors that we have.
Well, actually, I'll tell you right now, when I went further and looked up the slingshot effect of a planet in perihelion, it looks like the speed factor could be a factor of 20 different. I only went up to 5, and it landed us conservatively from the edge of Pluto inward at the year 2016, only using a scalar of 4. I can go all the way up to 20 based on what I know. So that adds some corrective factor to the bad Neugebauer rate, because we didn't have the measurement of the planet at aphelion. Okay, so that's where the conservative part of this comes in. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go up to a scalar of 5, that shows that it would have crossed perihelion in 2009. Okay, so then you ask yourself, well, how long could it be behind the sun? Well, this data that I had showed that from the time it comes inside of Neptune to the time it comes back out takes 30 years. Whereas at the other end, at aphelion, it takes 800 years to do the same distance. Remember, the factor of 20.
Wow.
Or 600 years. 600. It was a factor of 20. So 30 on one and 600 on the other. So now all of a sudden you say, well, by the time it gets near Neptune, you mean it could be all the way at perihelion within 30 years? Sure enough, could. So the next thing I did is I took Harrington's distance of 6.6 billion miles, which was 5 billion miles, or the one from his orbital chart. Okay, well, it looks like it was to scale. In the worst case, we could take that number to 8.67 billion miles, which is not a long distance in astronomical terms. Okay.
No.
And we could use that as our point to calculate how long it would take Nibiru to come into perihelion with the sun, just like we did if it was parallel with Pluto. So this is just outside of Pluto. Using the Neugebauer rate again, and this time I added a few more scalars because I wanted to see what it would take to get it into the time frame of right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, and see if it could be potentially correlated with the Earth changes, the change in our gravitational North Pole, and some other things that science seems to have corroborated that is happening. Okay, so I'll just skip forward. If you go to a scalar factor of 7, then that lands you at 2017. And if you go to a scalar factor of 8, it lands you, it looks like I have a mistake in the table, I gotta fix that. It lands you at 2012. Okay, so between only a scalar factor of 7 and 8, it lands us into our current time frame again. And like I told you, the scalar factor looks like it should be as high as 20. So, if Harrington, if that's true, well, let's just play a game. If he was in New Zealand in 1991, where he died trying to see this planet.
Yep.
And it was as close in as potentially approaching the galactic ecliptic or the solar ecliptic, coming in from the south in the constellation of Libra near Cassiopeia, like he said.
Mm-hmm.
Then it could have been just this side of Jupiter. Okay, and if that's the case, then we're already a few planets in from Pluto, and this number would be short. So all of a sudden you realize that either one of these tables, if you take into account the Neugebauer rate is probably off, and the slingshot effect can go all the way up to 20. What I'm telling you is that from the time he looked at it to right now, and you would only have to add about 18 to 22 years, something in that range. Okay? And you would go from 1991 and add that, and you land in our current time frame. So what I'm telling you is
the numbers are real, Gerald.
Not only due, but it looks like it's potentially in perihelion right now.
Yeah, the numbers are real. I mean, I'm looking at the tables, Gerald. I mean, I urge the people, if you want to understand this, you want to get a grip on this, it's the math is a lot easier to understand with the tables and the graphs, and it's quite simple and logical to follow. It's just a couple of simple equations, and you've done it really well as well, Gerald. I mean, the numbers make sense. I mean, the numbers are very realistic, and the window, Gerald, is the window that we're in now.
Yeah, well, this is what kind of put few chills on the back of my neck, and realized, kind of like this brought me full circle. You realize, in my first book, The Anunnaki of Nibiru, I took a lot of the research on Nibiru and figured everybody was at this place trying to prove that the Anunnaki were real and that their planet was real. And everybody was in this defensive posture, and it was all information being presented in a way to defend the theory. And I decided to do something a little differently, where I took already translated Sumerian documents. I wasn't defending the translation, and I took them from a source other than Sitchin, because the poor guy was under assault at the time. And I took them from the Oxford University, right? Those three basic ones, all you need to do to get the story, it's there. Mm-hmm. And went forward. And so I looked at everything that was going on with Nibiru. I decoded the Enuma Elish. I knew about it from way back when from reading Sitchin's documents. And so I was kind of already comfortable with the idea that this planet was out there, but because of all the disinformation, in my mind, it had kind of gotten cloudy. Just where the hell is it? Right?
It is.
But after I spent a week and just used the scientific method, which works for me, okay?
Yeah.
And saw the numbers, it was irrefutable to me that there could be people out there that do have pictures of two suns in the morning, and those might be real. And I'm going to have to go look at those now, because I really think the numbers just cannot be refuted.
I mean, are we saying, Gerald, this thing is only visible in the southern hemisphere? Is that correct?
Well, what I'm saying is, if Harrington thought he could see it with an 8-inch scope in 1991, fast forward to now, so that's how many years is that? Let's 10 years would be 2001, and then add another, so that'd be 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 26 years. Well, what did we just say about the entire transition from Nibiru, from this inner segment of the elliptical arc? I told you it looks like it only takes 30 years to go from the point just inside Jupiter all the way around. Guess what? It's been 26 years. That means it's in perihelion and it's about to come out. Or it's just coming out and we're just now starting to see it. And these people that are claiming to have pictures of two suns, I mean, they're not just a few of them, they're all over the world, would explain a planet that's reflecting the sunlight that's in or close to coming out from right behind the sun so that you can see it. Now, the real question is, what happens next?
Yeah. You know, and they say in Hamlet's Mill that it is the brightest star in the sky. Nibiru is the brightest star. It makes reference to that. You know, this is incredibly, just to say, John, it is an incredibly difficult task that we're doing here today. It's incredibly difficult to pinpoint Nibiru to calculate the distance of Nibiru. I mean, but there is a line of research and there is a line of inquiry that you just explained with the scientific method that puts us in tangible parameters. We can say, look, it's in this window here, and this is conservative information. It could be actually right upon us, or it could be not too far from us. But this window is a lot narrower than we think it is, Gerald.
Yeah, recently I've just had a thought that this Lucifer infrared scope that was put on Mount Graham in Tucson.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the timing of when that was built is indicative of where Nibiru was, because you realize if you're in Arizona, you're not down on the South Pole Observatory. You're in the Northern Hemisphere trying to see this thing now. That means that scope had to be set up to look at it coming out of perihelion.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, if I go back and look, well, when was that thing put together? I think it was around 2007 or 8, something like that. 2009.
Yeah.
So they put everything in place, made sure they had it functional and blah, blah, blah for some period of time before the actual event where they could start seeing it. So I would say, I personally think around 2013, I think it went fully into perihelion, from what I can tell, but based on my calculations here.
Can we talk about the Google Sky analysis, Gerald?
Oh, sure.
I want to mention this because the picture on Google Sky is the one that I've been seeing. I wasn't even aware of this, but it looks like there's 2 horns on it, like the winged disc.
Yeah, we had to pick one photo, by the way. We kind of passed over this, but we had one photo I found on the internet. This figure 14 in my document here on page 30. Okay, that apparently got leaked. I don't generally like to follow threads where I can't get any tangible data, but it's the only one that supposedly was leaked from NASA. Now, I can't back that up, but I just thought I'd provide it in a link to where it came from so people can look that up. So I put that up there. But as far as Google Sky goes, I think this is a really neat tool. I don't know if people have ever used it. And, you've got the Google Earth that lets you navigate the whole spherical globe of the planet, which is really fun. Mm-hmm. And also now they have this Google Sky, so you can bring up this tool. So you have Google Earth open. It's one of the task menus or the menu items at the top that lets you change the sky mode. Well, a lot of people use this for looking at ephemeris and orbits and lots of different things. And I thought, well, if Harrington was looking in the constellation Libra from the southern hemisphere for this thing to come in, what do we have in the reports on the internet, whether that's fallacy or fact, that corroborate with some object that's been found that might be this item, that maybe have a different designator or something like that, right? So I started looking around, and I found some conspiratorial kind of things. Whether it's true or not, I can't say. But one link on Google Sky came up and said, hey, here's a position in Google Sky where we think Nibiru is. And they had classified it as HD 37784. Now, I got to go back and look back at NASA now and see everything I can find about HD 37784 and why that was chosen. And it turns out it's in a constellation that looks like Scorpio, not Libra. So anything that showed up in Harrington's orbital chart from Libra over all the way down to or from Libra all the way up to Pisces, I believe it was. I made it fair game to possibly observe it in Google Sky and see what I could find. Okay, so I went through this, and even there was an area that some people claimed where Nibiru was on the online multiverse that was blacked out by Google. And I thought, well, those are always interesting areas. Why would you black out an area unless you just didn't want people to look there, right? So I gave the coordinates of that. I went to try to find it, and I was unable to find that. But if you could find what that is, it'd probably be pretty telling if they're eliminating some data so that you can't see it, okay? Given what we know about NASA and their connection with Google and the 3-letter agencies, okay? So anyway, I put HD 37784 Google Sky, and it brings up kind of this bright constellation, and then right next to it, just down and to the left, you can see this winged-looking disk planet that's somewhat orangish red that people have claimed is Nibiru. And I thought, okay, well, great. There's a picture. It's pretty big. Can't tell much else from it. So I went, that's figure 15. Then I went and looked it up on Google Sky with just a different perspective, zoomed out a little bit so I could see where it was. It was just north of Orion's belt, north of Betelgeuse, and I don't know. It wasn't hard to find if you went from there. Okay, mm-hmm. So I think it's right next to 121 Tau as well. Okay, but anyway, I gave you a picture of it, and actually the coordinates show up in the lat long, so you can put it in if you want. But if you just put HD space 37784, it'll bring it in. You can zoom out and see this view. Okay, well, I went to skymap.org based on this information on this reporting. It was reported in 1989, by the way, and they called it HD 1989. It was called Tycho 2-2000 as another name, USNO-A2.0. So that's the United States Naval Organization, Naval Observatory. That's where Harrington worked. Okay. Then there's a BSC. I'm not sure what that means, but it was dated 1991. So this one kind of got my attention. I thought, well, maybe there's something here. Mm-hmm. Listed in the constellation Taurus. We have the coordinates for it. And I thought, well, it kind of has the attributes of Nibiru with that, you know, that, looks like wings coming off the side, which is shown on some of their depictions for Nibiru. So I thought, okay, well, it's conspiratorial. I don't view it as hard scientific, but here's what we have. So I provided that as well. Okay. And they also gave you the distance it's away.
Incredible, Gerald. Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so there's stuff out there. I don't know if that's it, but, it gives you something to look at. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. I was going to include some of the pictures of the two suns that everybody's talking about, calling it Nibiru. Listen, I've dismissed every one of those. Number one, I started out dismissing anything that saw it before it was inside of Pluto, for that matter, unless you had a IRAS scope. Because of the temperature of the planet and being that far away from the sun, you just could not see it without a supercooled device. Mm-hmm. Now, once you got in closer, seeing it with the naked eye, or potentially with a scope like Harrington had, is possible. Okay. So where does that take us to? Possibly down to what the Colburn Bible had to say about this, or what do you think?
Yeah, let's mention the Colburn Bible. I'm not entirely sure on the background of the Colburn Bible, but I actually, until today's show, Gerald, I've heard of the Colburn Bible by name. I never looked at it before, never looked into it, but it's incredibly interesting document, Gerald.
It is. You know, I tried to follow the creation account of man in the Colburn Bible, trying to correlate the names of the Anunnaki and such, and I have to be honest with you, I really couldn't make the correlation. There's some very interesting correlations between the functional story, and also a lot of stuff about Nibiru. That's the part I kind of wanted to focus on. And that's from the Book of Creation, chapter 3. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, they talk about Nibiru, Planet X, being a very large, it says it's cold, but bright, and beneath its belly was a huge trail of smoke and debris that it drags along. And basically that seems to be the genesis of where the depictions of it, calling it a dragon, were, you know, in the sky, that it's this long entourage of debris that gets dragged through the asteroid belt when it comes through. Because remember, it crosses between Mars and Jupiter. That's where the asteroid belt is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It talks about significantly in the Colburn Bible about it being a destroyer planet, and that every time it did come through, I mean, the descriptions, and I don't know that we want to get all into that. It's kind of like Revelations. It's pretty vivid as it talks about what this planet does as it comes through. It talks about it burning the surface of the planet.
Oh, gruesome.
Boiling all the water off. Nothing survives, okay? Men were stricken with terror, went mad at the awful sight in the heavens. Well, where have we heard that before? That came right out of Revelations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's talking about wormwood and all the evils that came with the plagues of Egypt. Well, a lot of people have seen that as a comet or a planet crossing that caused a lot of perturbations in space and caused those pestilences and plagues to happen on the earth. So they kind of see it as related. And so does the Colburn Bible.
It's incredible stuff, Gerald. You know, for me, Nibiru is real. I have no doubt about it. From ancient texts or scientific data or both, I mean, Nibiru is real. Is it incoming? It's incoming. It's just a matter of how far on that journey it is. And I think we've got some answers today, Gerald. I think we've reduced the data down to some very, very synthesized analysis. You know, it's just, you know, how accurate can you try and refine your data now at this stage, Gerald? But it's incredibly...
like I said, only those who have the ephemeris for the planet could actually answer exactly where it is.
Yeah.
Based on our narrowing it down and all the evidence, I would not have believed it had I not sat down and put all the numbers in front of me, but I truly believe that it's already in perihelion.
Yeah, which is a difficult task, but I keep telling you this, Gerald. I mean, I'm sure you know more than anybody. I mean, this took you a week to prepare for this show, but I commend you on that. It's an excellent document you put together, and it's backed up with just the pure facts and the pure science and the pure logic of it. Let's speculate a bit, Gerald, just to wrap up. I mean,
okay, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go too heavy on fear mongering, but I mean, NASA knows about this. I mean, I've no doubt. I mean, if this thing is coming in and it's where we think it is, or it's even, you know, approaching us. I mean, NASA's known about this for a long time. Governments have known about this for a long time, Gerald.
Yeah, I think every government on the planet knows about it. And you know, recently from NASA, we've heard about, we're going out looking for these Earth-like planets all over our galaxy now that we realize there's so many. And then just recently, and I was looking for it just yesterday or the day before, I heard that NASA had announced this new planet that they had found inside of Neptune. And I was like, what? Or a new body of some sort. And it's like, really? No matter whether it was a comet or a planet, I can't remember. It was significant news, and I couldn't find it in time to get it into this document, but I wanted to. You know, so fast forwarding to now, people can look around the planet and go, well, let's assume that it was true. How would people respond? Well, you can go to like the movie 2012 and look how the government responded. Don't tell anybody. Have a refugee plan for those that are serving the government, you know, for continuity of government, and everybody else gets sacrificed and not told. Sure. You know, I thought about that. You know, that's very conspiratorial. But let's play a game.
I think it's very realistic, Gerald. I don't think it's I think it's very realistic. I don't think.
Well, yeah. Well, let's play another game. You know, the Cold War went on since the 50s with Russia, since World War II, and at some point, it got so bad here in the United States that we believed a nuclear assault was imminent on our homeland, and people were building underground shelters left and right all over the country. Okay, and at the same time, everybody realized that they were vulnerable too from an intercontinental ballistic missile, all governments around the world. And they started burrowing in, at least initially at their presidential headquarters, you know, underground bases where they could survive a surface impact from a nuclear device, or even one that blew up above the surface and caused an EMP. Right? Well, they could still do just as much damage depending on what altitude they were exploded. So the general idea is everybody realized there was a danger from the air and that they had to have a survival plan for continuity of government first, underground. And some countries like Russia went so far as to build underground facilities for their entire populace, whereas Other ones didn't, like the United States, or at least they didn't tell you if they did.
Well,
So,
I think the underground bases, though, Gerald, have been on the increase since the IRAS satellite data, and I think that the nuclear arsenal is actually, it's on the decline. They're decommissioning nuclear subs and nuclear, not totally. I mean, they're trying to reduce the numbers. They're not trying to increase it. They're trying to reduce the numbers of nuclear arsenal. That doesn't make sense to me that they're still in this nuclear mode, or they're still in this nuclear operation. I think that they're trying to decrease the nuclear arms because they realize that they're not going to push the button. Out of all the nuclear arsenal and the stockpiles that are out there, Gerald, they cannot let one of them off again. Not one of them. They just can't. If Americans ever did what they did on Hiroshima again, they would be shunned on this planet. There's nobody would speak to them. They did what they did back in 1945 in the World War II when they dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I mean, they did what they did back then. I mean, that was the first time ever. If they ever did that again, Gerald, they would be frowned upon. There was nobody where would they do it anyway? It's just the most inhumane thing to do, just to incinerate people like that, so they can't do it. They know they can't do it. I mean, even if they wanted to flex their muscles and control somebody, wouldn't matter how bad that other nation was or what that nation did. They just can't do it, and they know they can't do it. So the nuclear arsenal.
But they can take depleted uranium and put it into armament, fire it onto a foreign country's battlefield, and leave it there radiating and get away with it that way.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah, well, we're kind of getting into a little bit about conspiratorial things and corroborating actions by governments and peoples to determine, is this information real? And if it was, how would they respond? In general, that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
So, so the fact that there's been a catalyst to cause governments to build underground facilities since the 1950s, that one isn't all telling for me. Has there been an increase in underground preparation and storing up the rat nest for water and food and so on and so forth since the first article was released by Harrington in 1981? Possibly. That's a very good theory, and if that could be corroborated, then you could say the actions that are being taken for building underground tunnels and connecting them to cities and putting maglev trains and spending our money like that and then leaving you out with no plan would make a lot of sense to me. But right now, in my head, the fact is we can't distinguish the actions of the governments for going underground, whether it's based on the threat of nuclear war or whether it's the threat of Nibiru. And actually, I think they're playing that card very well. Because guess what? Whichever one it was, they have overlapping functions by having a underground facility that could survive either a nuclear winter or the passage of Nibiru.
Overlapping.
At least they think so. At least they think so.
Overlapping function is the key term, Gerald. I mean, maybe they started off with a nuclear scare as the motive, but it's migrated into Nibiru, and they went, well, we already got these underground bunkers. Let's expand on that. And that's now become the new motive. But, there's an overlapping function here for sure, Gerald. Look at the Svalbard seed vault as well, Gerald. I mean...
Right. Hey, I was looking at something today on this capabilities for building underground tunnels. Oh, my goodness. I had no idea they had rail devices that are shooting out a plasma laser that are melting cylindrical holes in the material, not even having to excavate.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing miles at a time in a day. That is unbelievable with this automated device. Think about that.
Sure.
So, did they put a tunnel system all into the United States since the 1950s during the Cold War up until now in preparation for surviving a nuclear winter or the cyclical destruction of the periodic cyclical destruction of the surface of the planet Earth? Based on its interactions with a very large planet that comes around every 3,600 years. And by the way, I sent you a table, start with some assumptions about some of these start dates, the Sumerian Kings list back, the Sumerian Kings list forward, and then using these other calculations to see if that was a passage event, what all the other ones were, so you could see forward and backward in time. And then try to corroborate those with events that we knew of in history. So I did a lot of thinking about this last week, okay, is what I want you to know.
Sure.
And I thought that was very telling as well, based on the last one I sent you, assuming that Harrington's data was correct. It lines up very well with some significant events in history.
Ice Age, Toth building Giza.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even with some of the
creation accounts.
And I know we're not going to talk much about it, but even corresponds with the time frame that Enki was on this planet, and the time frame when humans were genetically known to have been spawned about 220,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of correlations in there that I thought, aha, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, just to surmise, I mean, yeah, without getting too conspiratorial, I mean, I have no doubt. I mean, if these guys know this thing's coming in, they're going to prepare, Gerald. They're going to prepare, and they're going to prepare for the worst. And they're probably already doing that anyway. They've probably got the elitists of the military governments of the world. They've probably got so much money, Gerald. They don't know what to do with it. They've probably nothing else better to do with their bloody money than to start digging tunnels and building safe houses. Just a point worth noting, though, Gerald, this is for the audience. The human race spends 80% of its time undercover, whether that's in your car or in your house, protecting yourself from sun or rain or extreme weather or underground or inside buildings. The human race spends 80% of its time undercover. And that's what we do as a human race. Whether you're driving to and from work, you're under the roof of your car, you're in work, you're in your home, you're 20% of the time is outside. So we are already a race that lives undercover. It's because we have to, we protect ourselves from just even normal weather that we don't like, but to face, something dangerous like Nibiru coming in, if it is a close crossing, if it is close and it affects us, maybe it's not, Gerald. Maybe it's just going to come by and have mild effects like heating up volcanoes and some magnetic effects. I mean,
it looks like I think several times it comes by where it actually maybe causes some effects, but they're not as devastating every single time. It really just depends on where the Earth is relative to when it comes at the crossing point. And by the way, they called it the planet of crossing in New Milish as well for that reason.
Yeah.
So, so here in my mind, I have trouble distinguishing between the adjacent planets experiencing what they're experiencing right now, which is change, as well as our Earth experiencing change, whether that is completely attributable to us passing through the galactic center, which I don't know exactly how long that takes once you start going through there. Well, the Mayans said it started happening around 2011. So how long does it take to go through the galactic center? Maybe 3 years, 3.5 years? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So maybe we're just coming out of that now. And that's where we have this encounter with Nibiru, where it first got trapped in our solar system the first time. Mm-hmm. Don't know. But but those two seem to be correlated. So, our bottom line is, are the Earth changes that are taking place? And those changes are undeniable in my mind. I think we looked at the report yesterday. There were 41 earthquakes or volcanoes going off at the same time.
Simultaneously. Yeah.
Now, sometimes they'll get 50 in a year, but not simultaneous.
Yeah. So, which is incredible.
Yeah, and we've had some very large earthquakes that seem to be correlated with planetary locations that people have been tracking. So, there are definite changes going on in the weather patterns and the gravitational North Pole has been moving around, and so something is tugging on the Earth. And whether it's the torsion from a dense field that would be at the galactic center based on the gravity differential there, and our Earth spinning and going through it like a gyroscope, like I talked about in my first book, or it's from Nibiru passing through with its constellation, by the way, to the south, causing the Earth's orbital plane to tilt slightly. And if it did it just right, it could cause the Earth to wobble a little bit and cause a very large flood on the surface. And this, this goes back to writings about Charles Hapgood and such, whether he was credited or not. But there were writings about these kind of things, Velikovsky's writings, and also this Hamlet Mill document you give me, and the Colburn Bible. There's clearly something that periodically comes through and disturbs life on this planet, usually resulting from disturbing the sun, causing a CME, or some sort of discharge such that the surface becomes uninhabitable, or could result in a watery death if the Earth gets wobbled on its axis.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And right now it looks like we're not getting wobbled, but we're definitely getting pulled off our axis. Well, what if the thing that's pulling us off the axis goes away? Will we slowly come back and not have a flood event? I don't know. The other concern is when it does come around and goes back out toward aphelion, it's going to be dragging all these asteroids that brought in the perihelion with it.
Sure.
And when those cross the solar ecliptic, where all of our planets rotate in the opposite direction, they're going to have an encounter with some of this debris. So that's another concern that some people are probably concerned about.
Wow. Well, Gerald, we're out of time at the top of the second hour. Of course, GeraldClark77.com. You'll catch the article that Gerald did for today's show there. Of course, I'll stick a link in the YouTube description if you're listening on YouTube. And great research, Gerald. Great. I commend you on that today. I really thank you for that. It's great to get to some answers and some realistic discussion based on science.
Do you feel like you got to some answers today?
I do, and it's because of the logic and the science that we follow. Follow the scientific methods. Don't get too wild on your keep some conservative approach there, and we did that, Gerald. And you also have to allow your imagination to say what if, to see if dots connect, so that you can establish a new theory. Because science is nothing but a bunch of theories that are supported by facts. Well, so you can't be afraid to, and I've been very conservative that way, is to, especially with something that's life and death like this, is to make inferences. And I do want to just put a plug out there and say, I wrote a very long conclusion to this document that's 49, the whole document's 49 pages long. So I wrote about 6 pages in the conclusion. Mm-hmm.
And, if the data's real,
mm-hmm.
and the tunnel building and the government's plan to continue itself involves underground facilities, then you're not invited. Hey, you got some emotional issues to deal with and some real life decisions to make that have to do with facing your Faustian cliff and your own death. And that's intense for people. That's probably why this topic is one of the number one topics to be looked at on the internet right now. It's just unbelievable how much interest there is.
I think that's what I think that's what gathers the attention, Gerald. As negative as it is, I think that's what gathers the attention. I know.
Well, so I tried to at least make an attempt at my position on how I would face this event and how I see myself in a bigger scheme relative to some of the other writings that I've done especially in the second book. So I won't tell you what it is now, but I hope it hits its mark. Because it's very, very, it's a very deep topic. It's very intense for people it's like finding out you have cancer and you got 6 months to live. Now what
exactly.
Are you gonna go fill out a bucket list and go experience the hedonism of the external world to the best that you did, so you didn't feel like you missed a thing? Or are you gonna go inside and try to figure out what this evolution and ascension thing is all about?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned ascension.
Deep thing that it brings up whenever you look at this data, and it hits you right between the eyes.
I'm glad you mentioned ascension there. You reminded me of the Ascension Symposium in discussing the Anunnaki in the Yucatan, Gerald. We have a conference coming up September. There's limited places, so if anybody wants to get involved with the limited places, sign up at GeraldClark77.com, or you can see it on JamesSwagger.com as well. You'll catch myself and Gerald there doing a small, cozy symposium. We're going to talk about all sorts of wonderful stuff, and you can catch the whole program, what we're going to do there. But Gerald, I really thank you for your time today, and I appreciate the effort you put in for today's show. what a production and a great article. I mean, so it's almost like a mini book, Gerald. It really is, and I really thank you for that.
Well, us engineers, you being one, we connected as engineers, and we have expectations about doing things right. Right? Sure. The devil's in the details. So, if you want people to be able to follow the threads and get to an answer, you don't do stuff and put your arms around it and say, well, this is mine. It's all about my ego. And, I should be, I should be giving tenure here. Instead, we're approaching this from a different standpoint. You and I aren't being paid anything to do this.
Sure.
But to just explore the truth. And I appreciate that about you as well, because I know not everybody would sit down and read a 49-page document before committing to do a radio show. You expect a lot from me, but I expect a lot from you too, and it works for us.
No, it's cool, bro. It's cool. Well, Gerald, we'll pick up the podcast on the Emerald Tablets next time, but for now, we'll finish off the show, and I look forward to the next show in the not too distant future.
Me too, brother. It's been great.